Each one is an individual for me. The ones who fight, the ones who hug each other, the ones who die. They're individuals. And so with the Azerbaijanis, I do not distinguish lives. I do not see people as enemies. On the political level, I do not see any country to be an eternal enemy or an eternal friend. On a state level, you have to negotiate, you have to build trust, and when you don't trust, you do security guarantees.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of Faces of Armenia, we warmly welcome you to another special series on Nagorno-Karabagh. Today with Professor Gerard Libaridian, also known for his role as a senior advisor to Armenia's first President Ter-Petrosian, as well as first Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. Quick note to our special initiatives on Artsakh. We hope in which we offer experts from a variety of fields a platform to share their perspectives and to reflect upon Nagorno-Karabagh, by which we hope to add to a substantiative discussion, strengthening mediating forces, both of which will hopefully add and aid a timely end of the war. A quick and final note to Faces of Armenia. We see ourselves as a bridge connecting Armenia with the international community, both raising global awareness of Armenia and calling for the international community to support Armenia effectively during these grim times. So, but without further ado, Professor Libaridian, if you could kindly drop a few words to yourself, to your person.
Thank you, Mr. Koenig. I am very happy to share my thoughts with you and answer your questions. I am a historian by training. I did my doctoral degree at the University of California in Los Angeles. And since then, I've had a series of different adventures, I might say, in academia. I've taught at a number of universities, published internationally in a number of languages. I have specialized in Armenia, but also the wider circle, the region, the Caucasus and the region of the Republic of Armenia, that would include Russia, Turkey, Iran, the Caspian issues, and also from a Middle Eastern perspective, because of Armenians are present in many of the Middle Eastern countries. My last position teaching was at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, where I was the Manugyan Professor of Modern Armenian History. It's an endowed chair, and for 12 years I was there. In the last 5 years, I was the director of the Armenian Studies program at that university. And I retired in 2012, returned to Boston, which has been my base since 1981, from the last century. Now, in the meanwhile, I did work in Armenia for 7 years at the invitation of the first president of the Republic, Levon Ter-Petrosian. And I started as head of a new department for research and analysis for the Democratic Parliament of Armenia. And that was 1991, January, a year before the country became independent. So for a year, I was a Soviet official. And then at the end of 91, when there was the election of the first president of Armenia as an executive president, I was appointed advisor in 91. In 92, 93, 1993, I was simultaneously First Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. And from 94 to 97, I was Senior Advisor, Secretary of the Security Council of Armenia, and Ambassador at Large. During those years, I ended up more in diplomacy than in domestic affairs. I was the chief negotiator with Turkey for many years. I was a negotiator and then chief negotiator with Azerbaijan. And in that capacity, I also worked closely with Iran and Russia, the US, EU. So I've had exposure all the way to China and Egypt. So, but my main concerns had been relations with Azerbaijan and Turkey.
So, dear Professor Libaridian, before we drill into your very interesting and compelling role as an Armenian official, can you potentially share a little bit of your perspectives, how you think the global centers of Armenian studies contribute to Armenia and contribute maybe even to today's situation?
Well, the United States is the main country where you have such centers. We have about 14, 15 endowed chairs of Armenian studies, usually history, language, literature. Of these, 5 are in Massachusetts, at Harvard, at Boston University, at Tufts University, there's 2. There's Clark University, there's 1. That specializes on genocide studies. UCLA has 2 chairs, Berkeley has 1, Fresno State has 1, Michigan has 2, University of California, Irvine has 1. These are endowed chairs, but also active program, Columbia University, I'm sorry, active programs, that is programs that have activities outside of classroom teaching. That would be lectures, conferences, publications, postdoctoral positions, seminars outside of the classroom. These would be the most active, I would say, Michigan. University of California now has a new center. Fresno State has a center. And Columbia, that's not very active. So these are very active. In France, there are a couple of institutions of higher learning that have such positions, not necessarily endowed, but as part. The Sorbonne has a position. The Institute of International Relations has one. The Institute for Oriental Languages has one. And Oxford has one, Oxford University. So these are endowed chairs that sometimes do have programs. This is a very different Western kind of institution, the likes of which don't exist in Armenia. In Armenia, you have the Academy of Sciences, you have the Yerevan State University and other universities where you have teaching or research. And you have the Madena Taram. It's teaching and research. The outreach to the community, activities outside are limited to sometimes conferences. Increasingly, they're getting public lectures and whatever. So these centers contribute to bringing knowledge of Armenia, Armenian history and culture, to countries where Armenians exist. It's a very interesting process because universities are very, very happy to have programs that are self-financed. The money usually comes from Armenian communities, some wealthy Armenians who donate money so that, let's say, Americans know about Armenian history.
And so that's actually where one of my questions would continue. So how do you see these centers promoting Armenia, not only within the diaspora, but also among non-Armenians, for example, the American community at large?
Well, to begin with, in all of these universities where there are courses, a lot of the students are not Armenian. So, for example, when I used to teach a course on, it was called Conflict and Diplomacy in the Caucasus, I had a limit of 30 students. It was immediately filled. I wouldn't take more, so we could have give and take, you know.
Mm.
And of these, maybe 4 or 5 would be ethnic Armenians. So you have every year. Similarly with the Armenian history, I've had a course on comparative diasporas. So most of the students were not Armenian. I did a course on the Third Republic through actual documents. And I had 20 students, of which 3 were Armenian. So if you have the right methodology and approach, you usually end up with a large number of non-Armenian students. And then with your conferences and guest lectures, your colleagues get to know about it. And many of these activities are open to the larger community. So that helps the larger communities, non-Armenian, get to know. But also, of course, these are scholars who publish articles, who publish books, and there are book events. And so these books are sold. Armenian studies books are easily sold, unlike others. My book on modern Armenia was printed 3 times. It had 3 printings, and it was translated to French. My book on the challenge of statehood on the Third Republic was printed 3 times in English, twice in Armenian, once in French, and 3 times in Turkish. It was translated. So when you are a scholar, you write, and in many cases, these books sell very well. And the market is not just Armenians.
Yes, so then let me ask, what lessons do you think can Armenia offer to interested scholars, to interested students, also beyond Armenia? What is a compelling reason to become involved and to study Armenian studies?
Well, you know, there are general theories about history, about nation formation, about small countries facing big challenges, about small countries fighting each other, the story of empires ruling over other nations, right? So theories are based on actual experience. And the Armenian experience, beginning with the idea, is the Armenian nation an old nation or a new one? Is it constructed, or is it eternally the same since time immemorial? You know, these discussions, often theories that are generally applicable, when they come to the Armenian case, they hit an obstacle. That is, the Armenian case says, no, you may have to modify what you're thinking. So because it is, in fact, it has a long history, going back as Armenia 2,500 years, and as Armenian culture, etc. So you have a case study that is live, that is explorable, that has documentation. And so you as theory in general about humanity and human experience is built on specific cases, then including the Armenian case may help you build a theory or may help you destroy a theory. So, and the most prominent example is this argument between a constructed nation, that is, nations are born, basically the modern nation is born in the 18th, 19th century with print culture, where you speak of a nation that you haven't seen but you are part of, right? Then the question of nationalism, you know, or you know, as most Armenians want to believe, Armenians have been the same nation since 2,500 years, right? These are very, very useful examples to see why many non-Armenians. And of course, there's the case of the genocide, which is studied more in terms of numbers, studied more by non-Armenians than Armenians.
And so if I also may add my analysis, Armenians, the individuals living on the Armenian Plateau, their lineage goes back from Armenian descent about 4,500 years back. And I think as the world as we know it is fragmenting with polarizing political parties, it helps to study what contributed to the longevity of the Armenian nation, to the longevity of the Armenian people.
Right. A lot of the nations or peoples, culturally defined, that existed 2,000 years ago in the Middle East no longer exist as viable cultures or don't exist at all. So it is interesting as to how whatever changes they have gone through, how this concept of an Armenian nation exists, continues to exist, and whether you claim to be the same or somewhat different when Armenians say we are so many centuries old, right? You are who you define you are, you know? And when we say that our first historian is in the 5th century, right? Khorenatsi, you know, how many nations are there that can say that in the 5th century, right? To have a historian who wrote the history of the Armenian people, you know, and it was good, you know, scientifically. He has sources, he cites his sources, he questions his sources, he questions the information. There's a quasi-scientific approach to it, and it's translated, of course, that book to many languages. So it's, you know, there are not that many people who can claim that.
That's most certainly fascinating, and we will also make sure to have the book embedded here for our interested audience. But zooming on to the conflict we see today, could you maybe share a little bit of your perspectives before you started to become involved in Armenia as both a Soviet official and an Armenian official, which, like, so to speak, laid the foundation of the conflict?
Of course, this was of no interest to non-Armenians except officials in the Soviet government. This story goes quite a ways back. There are cultural similarities between Armenians and what are now Azeris. There are also major differences, one of which is religion. The other is language. Azerbaijani is a Turkic language, very close to that of Turkey, but not the same, mainly because in Turkey they modernized the language, or in Azerbaijan they didn't. So it's an old version. A lot of the terminology, the words are of Iranian and Arabic origin in Azerbaijani Turkish, while in Turkey, with Atatürk, Mustafa Kemal, they changed as much as they could in terms of the words, finding Turkic equivalents. And they've lived in the South Caucasus, of course, and they lived in a mixed way because there were a huge number of Armenians who were living in Baku, in parts of Azerbaijan that were once historically Armenian. There were Armenians living in Georgia.
I mean, if I may briefly interject, I know that most of our audience may not be familiar, but the Armenian Plateau at the time of its height went from sea to sea, from the Caspian to the Dead Sea. Maybe can you also briefly account how it shrank to its size that it has today?
Well, the Armenian Plateau is a geographic description that covers what you might say is a good part of what is today Eastern Turkey, all the way to what is today Armenia, and a little. That's a geographic concept. But in the early period, let's say beginning in the 2nd century of before our era, before the Christian era. There was a very big Armenian kingdom, which at one point became an empire because it did extend all the way to what is today Azerbaijan and all the way to the Mediterranean. But that was a short period. The kingdom itself would encompass what is today the Republic of Armenia, southern Georgia, western Azerbaijan, and all of eastern Turkey. So it was a very large area. That shrank because over time, the Armenian dynasties were not able to withstand external attacks, and fundamentally it started crumbling. The last Armenian kingdom on the territory on the plateau was
Kingdom of Ani.
Yes, with the capital of Ani, ended in 1045.
Mm-hmm.
So after that, we had the Seljuks. After that, we had the Mongols who came, and there was no Armenian state as such on what used to be Armenia until the First Republic in 1918. But in the process, the Persian and Ottoman empires fought each other, and fundamentally Armenia was divided in two parts, one under the Persians, the smaller part, and one under the Ottomans, Turks, the larger part. And so the eastern part then was taken over by Russia in 1827-28, and the western part remained under the Ottomans, and was basically, the population was destroyed as a result of the genocide, and we are the children of the survivors. My father was born in Tarsus in southwestern Turkey. My mother's parents were born in Urfa, which is now central, old Edessa, historical town. But before that, my family came from eastern Armenia. So our family is a very old one, and I can trace it. Very few can, because there was part of the nobility. The Libaridian family, it's us. There's no other Libaridian in the world. Okay? Among Armenians, there's no other Libaridian. It's the four brothers, one of whom was my father. Anyway, so gradually the population, of course, was destroyed, and what some of them survived in the Middle East, like my parents, and others survived by going to the Russian side and what became the Republic of Armenia. Now, also, during the First Republic, the Republic had two wars. In fact, had a war with Georgia for the districts of Javakheti in southern Georgia. And then there was a truce that gave Javakheti to Georgia and Lori to Armenia. Then there was a war on Karabakh and Nakhchivan with the Azerbaijanis, and we lost Nakhchivan. And there was a war with Turkey where the Republic lost the area of Kars, Ardahan, to Turkey. So the way I put it is, they took from Armenia whatever they could, okay? And what you have left is the 30,000 kilometers square Armenia. Yeah.
And the 1,700 square kilometer of Karabakh, of course.
What you have is, let's say if you look at 1980, Armenia became Soviet. The Soviets gave Karabakh to Azerbaijan with the understanding that it would have some kind of autonomy, gave Nakhchivan with almost 50% Armenian population, maybe more, again, to Azerbaijan. And that's what you had in 1930, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 was Armenia with a population, let's say 1988, Armenia with a population of 3.5 million. 500,000 Armenians in Azerbaijan, 200,000 in Baku, 150,000 in Garapal, and still others outside of Garapal. You had Nakhichevan, whose Armenian population had decreased from 50% plus to 20% or so in 1988, or even 6%, and then even that was gone. And then about 100-some thousand in Javakheti, and a large number in Tbilisi, in the capital. So there was Armenia, and then all these around it. The most problematic was Garapal, of course, where Armenians did not feel that it was right to be under Azerbaijan, that Stalin and others had made a mistake by awarding Garapal to Azerbaijan, when in 1920, 95% of the population was Armenian.
I would like to shine light on negotiation, one of your core expertises, so to speak.
Yeah.
Armenians had a history of being nimble negotiators. I'm always awestruck, for example, by the agreement that Armenia was able to hash out, or the Armenian people to hash out with the British India Company, whereby it allowed its merchants, the Armenian merchants, to trade under the protection of the British India Company in India. Right. So how does it came to be that Armenia was always able to find a common denominator, both with its foes and friends?
Well, Armenians are very good negotiators as businessmen. I'm not sure they are very good negotiators as diplomats on the state level. The Armenians were great merchants in Armenia, whichever part you want to take. And the reason why that economic empire was created was in one of those wars between Persia and Turkey and the Ottoman Empire, I'm sorry, when the Persians were retreating, they took a good number of Armenians from the Nakhchivan area to Persia, and by force, large number killed along the way and drowned in the river crossing to Persia. They were given refuge in Isfahan, near Isfahan, the famous city, the gorgeous city of Isfahan. And they were given, since they were good merchants, the Shah gave them certain privileges, tax privileges. And these guys very soon established themselves as merchants who expanded to India and then to Asia and all the way to Mexico. They had branches in Mexico and in Europe. So there are two reasons for that, why they were successful. First, they had experience in trading, in negotiating. Secondly, they functioned on the basis of trust. They trusted each other. They had a community of merchants so that they could transfer money and goods on the basis of trust that made it possible to accumulate capital. The third is that Armenians, not having a state of their own, did not represent a threat, political threat to anyone. Okay? The British allowed Armenians to become good merchants and to do business on the coast of India for one main reason. The British were not trusted by the Indian princes inside, off the coast. The Armenian merchants were trusted by the Indians. So the British allowed that to prosper. Armenians prospered, the Indian princes prospered, and the British prospered. But eventually, that became a problem for the British, and they started restricting the Armenian merchants. And although there's still Armenian institutions and churches in India, not many Armenians are left. But the ability of the merchants to function was not just a function of their own professionalism and expertise but also the international environment that allowed them to prosper.
But I would say there is definitely an ability to execute on a favorable environment,
Sure.
and to really test and experiment with trust as a currency. And I've seen, when I went to Singapore to look at various museums, the Armenian community, in fact, had a very large footprint in the Singaporean community.
Sure. And these were rich communities.
Yes, the Armenians are known as very intelligent merchants, I would say,
Right.
that can negotiate. And
But
so the question becomes, how can we translate this expertise on a political level? And there, maybe to give us a good foundation for the discussion, can we briefly have your quick few words on the creation of the First Republic of Armenia, or the Second Republic, I'm sorry, in 1991 September, and we take it
call
from
it the third. We call it the Third Republic.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, some people don't, but for the most part now it is accepted. We count that Soviet Republic was also a republic.
And I mean, one has to admit, life under the Soviet Union was not necessarily easy. And the Armenians were renowned for doing very well, even under the extractive, communistic-driven regime.
Well, in general, Georgians, Azerbaijanis, and Armenians did much better than others under the Soviet regime, because they have functioned under other empires, and they have found ways of doing things that for them was available. They had models, and other peoples did not have such models. I would say that before I answer your question, there's one very important aspect. The fact that Armenians were known as great merchants and were often very rich, from Isfahan to Singapore to whatever, also worked against Armenians, because these were the Armenians who were known by the world, while most Armenians in the Ottoman Empire and in the Russian Empire were peasants, and particularly in the Ottoman Empire, they did not live a very good life. So this is relevant to your faces of Armenia. How are Armenians known? If you are known as a very wealthy community, you invite jealousy, right? And you forget that there were hundreds of thousands of Armenian peasants who were reeling under the yoke of the Ottoman rulers, the local agas and pashas and the chieftains. And so this is a very serious problem in our history, so that even Armenian historians often forget that the liberation movement, the revolutionary movement, was not to liberate necessarily lands and create an Armenia, but to liberate the people and give them a chance to survive as an old community.
I can only agree, like in a community, it is never that the community in itself is rich, but that it bears or gives rise to some respectable, very successful individuals who shine a shadow upon the rest, so to speak, and they come in the predominant perspective and understanding.
Yeah, I think if you get to the 19th century, for example, it became Armenians adopted the idea of general education very quickly. And although the government, the Ottoman Empire, did not create schools, they created their own chain of schools down to the last village, where the only person who knew how to read was the priest. And the priest opened schools and started teaching the kids how to read. So going after education became part of Armenian culture. And that's why whenever they have a chance, they get the education and quickly move from zero to something. Like I came to this country, you know how many dollars I had in my pocket? I had about $42. okay? But I did work, I did get an education all the way to the PhD and whatever. And many others who come with no capital, they work, either they do something. There are not many Armenians who end up being poor in this country. Now in Lebanon, the same thing. We had our own school system. Now, of course, that community is destroyed by by corruption, political impotence, by civil war, and all kinds of problems. So that has been the story of Middle Eastern communities, where Armenians start doing well. The refugees who came with nothing became merchants, small businessmen, big businessmen, doctors, engineers, architects. Okay, so they recover quickly. They recover quickly.
And I'm sorry if I may add a personal note here again. So I read the thesis of, at the time, I think it was 1930 or so, of Arnold J. Toynbee, who wrote on the Armenian genocide. If you read these archives, one can just be shocked with how much viciousness, just complete vile, the Ottoman authorities tried to really exterminate Armenian life, Armenian prosperity, Armenian humanness. And still, if you read this account, it is just so inspiring in a way how the Armenian people were able to resurrect themselves and to spread throughout the world and to mostly not overcome, but I would say adjust to the horrific loss of the genocide.
Well, the loss of the genocide is first of all, the loss of lives, right? So I always have a mental reservation when we say we survived. Well, most of us did not survive. Most of us died. So, and that is a very important distinction. That the rest of us were able to recover, yes. Now, and to remember the dead. The second important thing is that unlike other genocides, including the Holocaust, the genocide meant that we lost our homeland too. And this is very, very important. That is, Armenians, as we discussed, have been there for centuries, millennia, and you know, I've looked at other genocides and there's no similar case. The Holocaust, Jewish Holocaust, did not cost Jews their fatherland. Okay, Israel was created after. The Cambodian genocide did not mean the loss of Cambodia. The Rwandan genocide did not mean that the Tutsis lost their homeland. Where else? You know, there is no such case where the genocide meant the loss of your fatherland. And that, I'm not even talking about the wealth that was lost, the institutions, schools, centers, churches, monasteries, and hospitals, businesses, the huge wealth that was lost. Now, that brings me to the question of the vileness and cruelty involved in the massacre. The government of the Ottoman Empire planning the genocide was able to involve the people, the neighbors of Armenians, the Turks, the Kurds, even some Arabs, in the process of genocide and dispossession by a number of tricks. That is, for some, it was the Islamic appeal. We have to get rid of these, you know, faithless people. For others, it was an appeal to their sense of Turkism, Pan-Turanism. Armenians are a problem. These are ideological tools They did not believe in much of this, but they used it to get the support. And of course, they allowed the robbery of Armenian property. Neighbors who'd been there for generations as neighbors, Turks and Armenians, suddenly, this was an occasion to take over the neighbor's furniture. Mm-hmm. Okay? The neighbor's business. This was a kind of putting people in trance so that they could participate. Now, many Turks and Kurds and Arabs helped Armenians survive, right? They took Armenians in. Some of them made them into Muslims, some not. But, this is a very crude kind of thing. But there was also another element. The Ottoman leadership was quite anti-intellectual, right? All fascists and proto-fascists, and the Ottoman Young Turks were proto-fascists, are anti-intellectual. They don't like democracy. They don't like debate. They don't like discourse and political discussion. They know what it is, and you have to follow, right? And the process, the fact that Armenians became quite educated, even in the villages, was resented, not just the wealth, but also the knowledge, the culture that was created among Armenians. And the best example of this is, you may or may not have come across this. There was a writer who was a lawyer, famous lawyer, Krikor Zohrab, who was also a member of parliament and a friend of the organizers of the genocide. Of course, he didn't know there was going to be a genocide. And they were colleagues. They drank together. They had coffee together. They were Masons together, right? And he, along with many such people, were driven to exile and killed. And they were killed by officers or political leaders. Krikor Zohrab was taken, and this story is told by the guy who drove the carriage, okay, of Krikor Zohrab and the man who was going to kill him. And when they arrived at the destination, a couple of 100 kilometers down from Istanbul, and they brought down Zohrab, they put his head on a stone and they crushed his skull, okay? And while doing that, the guy said, now go and think if you can, okay? Just the process of thinking. This is very important as to what kind of cruelty and how it came. They were killing a culture. They were not just killing, they were killing the positive side of what Armenians took from Europe, the Enlightenment.
I mean, this draws like important lessons, I think, for nation building, prosperity, because in a way there are many parallels. If you have a corrupt system, all incentives for education, for creativity are destroyed in the process, because essentially it is a disincentive to prosper in such a region. And the Ottomans were simply scared by having intelligent people that could potentially uncover or expose the shortcomings of the regime. And one observation that made me makes me sad again and again is the fact that the genocide could have been prevented. German officials were based all over the Ottoman Empire, and before the Germans had won the war against the Ottomans, the German could have said, no, you will not exterminate the Armenian race, but they just let go. Well, and
let me tell you give you a succinct way of understanding one of the fundamental dimensions of the genocide. And then I'll tell you a story about my grandfather.
Please.
The political discourse in the Ottoman Empire within the Young Turks, Armenians, and between them evolved in such a way that by 1912, the problem the Turkish elite, the Young Turks, were trying to resolve was, how do we save the empire, the state? The problem Armenian leaders were trying to resolve was, how do we save the people? So this in itself created the kind of opposition that led to an impasse. If I want to save the people, I want a state that is representative, governed by representatives, that is multinational, multi-religious, that has a way of resolving problems internally through democratic processes of elections. If I want to save the state, I would see whatever is bothering the state and get rid of it. I need to have a stronger army. I need to use force to solve problems. And this is the distinction in my mind that helps explain how these two, the Turks and Armenian, the leaderships diverged after having been together in 1908 and brought about the revolution that reinstated the Constitution of 1878. Now my story about my maternal grandfather, the one I said was born in Urfa.
Mm.
His father was killed in the 1894-96 massacres, okay? The family was poor, and they put my grandfather in an orphanage, a German orphanage, where he learned some German. They weaved drugs that were sold by the German missionaries and made money for the orphanage. In 1914, he was drafted into the Ottoman army. And he became a soldier at age 24, 25, of the Ottoman army. He told me so many times his story. I knew him quite well. He died in 1963. I was 18 at the time. He used to teach me how to play backgammon, and once in a while he would stop and start talking about what happened. And he told me the story that 3 times he escaped death in the Ottoman army as a soldier. The last time was, he said, they had made us work, right? Physical work, so hard that we were all very tired, Armenian soldiers, a special battalion. Then they took us out, no weapons, tied our hands in the back, and made a single line. And there was a tree trunk, and Armenian soldiers were supposed to put their heads down, and the heads were chopped off. Okay? And he said, I had escaped twice. I didn't know how I could escape this time. And he said, there were 4 ahead of me. So 2 minutes later, he would be gone. Like sheep. And he noticed a German officer watching the situation because they had a different uniform. So he screamed something in German. And the officer approached and said, Sprechen Sie Deutsch? And he said, yeah. And he was taken out as an interpreter. So he was taken in, and then 2 days later he escaped, walked all the way to Aleppo, and ended up in southern Syria. Oh, he joined the Arab army of Lawrence of Arabia, fought the Turks, and then when the war was over, he had nowhere to go. He ended up accepting the invitation of an Arab fighter, his friend, to go to southern Syria because the friend's father was the village chief and he was given a piece of land. He found his fiancée from the pre-war period. He got married, and my mother was born there in 1923 in southern Syria. And my aunts and my uncle were born there. And then they moved to Lebanon, where we were born. So the German connection is very, very close, very personal.
Yeah, I mean, like this worry was really, in a way, heartwarming.
Yes.
And I know that during the genocide, there were many individual heroes. And this, like, I think one can say, little wonders happen all through life. And we can.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Many people did not lose their humanity. And many Turks combined benefit with humanity. For example, a Turkish agha, a local wealthy guy, would tell the Armenian, if your daughter marries me and becomes a Muslim, I will help you escape, or I'll help you live. All right? So is this a humanitarian act or a self-serving act? Well, it's both. Some people didn't care. They killed or they helped kill. But others found a way to make something out of it. And others got nothing from saving Armenian lives, but they just couldn't see why kill innocent kids and women and whatever. So we have the whole spectrum of human deprivation and nobility.
And in a way, I would say these lessons are incredibly relevant today because we need heroes in our civil society, which it doesn't matter if they have like multiple perspectives or multiple rationales, but serving other civilians, helping our humankind survive, I think is a duty that has held true and that will hold true in future for the sanity of our humankind.
Let me add a comment to that very important note. And it relates to my experience with the Azerbaijanis. I made many friends among the Azerbaijani diplomats, as well as among the Turkish diplomats, Iranians, Russians. And it was very important to have that personal relationship. When negotiating either the ceasefire or the substance of the problem, status and territories and whatever, when you're negotiating, you have a certain image of the other, which then defines whether you trust the other or not, whether you know the other or not, whether you care about the other or not. A major difference between the 1990s and today is the following. In the 1990s, Armenians in Armenia and Azerbaijanis in Azerbaijan knew many others. That is, Armenians knew Azerbaijanis, Azerbaijanis knew Armenians. So these were real people for each other. And you could feel, although I never lived there, but after, before, but you could feel that the affinity is still felt. During the Soviet period, they visited each other. Scientists, academics talked to each other, right? They disagreed on history, but they talked to each other. Musicians visited each other. So it's a very different kind of conflict. And then a generation passes and it changes. Okay? And now they don't know longer each other. In order to have known an Azerbaijani, what Azerbaijanis look like, or Armenians, you have to be over 50 years old. Over 50 years old Soldiers are 18, 19, 20 years old. Officers are 30, 40 years old. They don't know each other. And this is something I discussed with President Heydar Aliyev. After having left my office in 97, I started writing, and for the purposes of a book, I talked and recorded oral histories with about 27 diplomats and leaders, prime ministers, ministers, presidents, of those who had been involved in the negotiations. I have not published those yet, okay? I went as a historian to understand their thinking. Not what happened, but what were they thinking when things were happening? For negotiators, for Turks, Armenians, Iranians, Russians, right? So for that purpose, I visited Baku and met with President Heydar Aliyev as a historian, right? And I had negotiated with him personally, tete-a-tete, before, but now it's a different relationship. And when we were talking with him, and then Ilham Aliyev invited me years later, his son, and I happily went, and we had a 3-hour discussion. And both made the following point: time is not on your side, on the Armenian side. Time is on our side. We're going to get richer, we're going to be stronger, and if need be, we're going to crush you. So what are you guys doing, thinking when you are resisting concessions, okay? And this happened with him, and then publicly in 2012 in Baku, again. There was a conference I spoke at publicly in Baku. And someone said, time is against you. And I said, well, time is very relative. Small nations like you and us, we cannot afford to have one single scenario in mind. Let me give you a scenario where time works against you. You want to have Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan, and you want to have Armenians accept Azerbaijani jurisdiction. Very well. This is what you want. Of course, some of you want to drive them out, get the land without the people, but let's say, be benevolent, and you're saying you want the land with the people, but under Azerbaijan. I said, you have bombed those people. You have called them terrorists. You refuse to speak with their elected leaders. And look at 1990, 1994, and look at 2012. At that time, you could talk about it. Right now, generations have passed. You guys have taught hatred toward all Armenians. You have bombed them. You have called them. And I said, right now, in 1999, I said to Heydar, it's different from 1990. But even 2012, look at who will be doing the fighting. No one in the army remembers Karabakh under Azerbaijan. No one. What remember of Azerbaijan, they remember, is being bombed. That's all. Having to fight you guys because you wanted to bomb them, because they didn't want to be with you. You bombed them. That's what they remember. Now, how am I, as a negotiator, going to convince Karabakh Armenians, with the army that there is of 19, 20-year-olds, to accept Azerbaijani rule when they don't know anything? They know that it used to be, but they have never experienced it. It is impossible for them to imagine. You see how time works against you. You can't do now what you could have done if you had agreed to some conditions in the past. You can't. Time works against you.
In this way, as you mentioned, time works against all of us, just from the right perspective. Dear friends, dear Professor Libaridian, it was our utmost pleasure to have you here with us today. And I believe all of us, our audience, the Armenian community at large, as well as the international audience, will we believe greatly benefits from your words and insights. Thank you very much for coming here today, and let us know if you have any concluding remarks.
Well, I think what is important for me is to first to think outside the box. The language of blaming each other, right, and not really understanding each other is not one that will lead to any kind of an understanding. I'm very happy to have this chance to comfortably, without time restriction, explain some fundamental issues that are to be understood on the human level. For me, when I've negotiated or when I write, I don't write to deal with numbers. Each one is an individual for me. The ones who fight, the ones who hug each other, the ones who die. They're individuals. And so with the Azerbaijanis, I do not distinguish lives. I do not see people as enemies. On the political level, I do not see any country to be an eternal enemy or an eternal friend. On a state level, you have to negotiate, you have to build trust, and when you don't trust, you do security guarantees. And that's how you build. The key to understanding this is we have to understand that Armenia is not going to pack up its bags and leave and go to live in Venice, right? And Turkey and Azerbaijan are not packing up their bags to go and we'll have France and Switzerland as our neighbors. That's not going to happen. We must begin with that truth. And finally, we should go after what is possible. Because when we go after what is impossible, we lose the chance of getting the possible.
Very powerful words. Thank you very much.